Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Capital Spotlight. Today on the podcast, we have Stephanie DeMarco of Spotify. She is a Capitol Hill alum. She's now been working at Spotify for a few years. She worked on the Energy and Commerce Committee. So we dive into how the Hill got her ready to have such a cool job at Spotify. I'm sure a lot of you just got your Spotify Wrapped a few days ago. So this is a great, timely episode. We didn't plan it this way. We're not that smart, but it's okay. Make sure to tune in. We talk about her music career. We talk about who she is outside of politics, of course. So check in. All right, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Capital Spotlight. I'm David Tennant, founder of Connect, and we are here today with Stephanie DeMarco, the manager of government affairs at Spotify. So welcome to the podcast. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
So let's get right into it. What does your life look like at Spotify right now? Give us a little bit of your lead up to working at Spotify and your career process to get over to such a cool spot.
Sure. So I came from the Hill, which is very common in the government
Typical.
affairs space. Yeah. So I worked for two different members on the Hill and both E&C. And so I had this sort of love for technology policy.
For sure.
And I come from a music background. And so when I saw, and obviously you're on the Hill, you love politics,
Sure.
all those three main things. And so when I saw that opening at Spotify, I was like, this melds all three.
Yeah.
And so that's how I ended up at Spotify. And it's been great ever since. So I've been there almost 2 years.
Nice. Well, we might as well get straight into why Spotify is such a great fit for you. Tell us about your musical career and just background in that world.
I wish I could actually legit call it a career, but unfortunately not. I originally went to school for vocal performance and was doing musical theater and was in a bunch of choirs and really enjoying that. I was a double major at the time at Susquehanna trying to do politics as well, and a little bit untenable. It's a lot of work and practicing and things,
sure.
so I sort of made the decision of where do I see myself and giving that up, but keeping a music tech minor. So love that we're on a podcast, the mics, all that good stuff. But yeah, it's always been a passion of mine. I still go to open mic nights and love a good karaoke.
All right.
So that's sort of the music nexus of it all.
What's your go-to karaoke song?
Depends on the mood.
All right, give us some moods.
But I really do love Honky Tonk Women by the
right.
Rolling Stones is probably
For
my number
sure.
one, or Sitting on the Dock of the Bay by Otis Redding.
Okay.
Yeah.
There you go.
What about you?
Rockstar by Nickelback.
Oh no, that's a controversial one.
Yeah, I don't know how much I'd be volunteering to sing that, but I do know all of the lyrics since I was like 8 years old, which was probably way too early to be listening to Rockstar, but it's still there.
If it hits you, gets you going, it's about the performance,
People love to hate on Nickelback, but I feel like they're just missing out, so.
I believe there was actually a debate on that on the House floor at one point. Two members were going back and forth about being Nickelback fans, if I recall.
I don't know. We'll have to find that.
Yeah, you'll have to find that clip. It's a good one, yeah.
Okay, good. We'll get our team on that ASAP. Yeah, so very cool background getting over to Spotify. I feel like Spotify is part of that like tech forward movement. You guys are always innovating. And I think part of that is creating a culture that is not so stereotypical, workforce vibes. So how does a company like Spotify balance that with the very typical like vibe of DC's work life?
Yeah, I definitely agree. We technically are a Swedish company, but our largest hub is in New York City. Mm-hmm. We're in the World Trade building there, and it is absolutely stunning. And so when you get to visit these major hubs of ours in the LA office or in Stockholm, Spotify, it really involves you in the culture. So within your first year that you start, they actually send you to Stockholm.
Very cool.
They call it intro days, where you hear from the board and you really learn about the culture. And so you get to see all the different offices, you get to see that tech culture, and they really do function almost as a startup. So blessing and a curse sometimes, but we definitely really value the creativity always, and we move fast, we break things, and I love that. I love that for us. I do joke sometimes in the DC world, we don't technically have like a main office here. We're in a WeWork suite.
Gotcha.
So it is a little bit different here. So it is fun, like I said, when you get to go to New York and you get to have a little taste of the real Spotify culture there. But they always make jokes that they can see the government affairs team a mile away when like all of us are together, because we're definitely a little bit more like we're walking around in blazers and they're like, you know, you guys like can wear t-shirts or like, what do you want? We're like, it feels wrong to us. Yeah. Or they'll meet me in person and they'll be like, oh, this is not how I envisioned you to be based on your emails. Like you're very professional, you're very straight to the point, which I think is the nature of DC, that like hyper professionalism. And we're walking around in blazers and we sit down for lunch and they're like, who are you? So it is a little bit of a balancing act, but I love having that opportunity to sort of let loose and throw a bunch of creative ideas out, where I think maybe in DC you'd maybe keep some of that stuff a little close to the vest and really be thoughtful. And I feel very comfortable in being like, off the top of my head, I'm going to spitball a few crazy ideas. And it's so widely accepted, and I love that.
Yeah, for sure. It's super engaging, and I think the proof is in the pudding. Spotify is doing very cool things. They're always on the cutting edge of music technology, and definitely appreciate that. I last time, or a few times ago when I was in LA, I was at like a entrepreneurs meetup, and it was like a bunch of creative people, and I walk up there in something like this where it's like a button down and khaki shorts, and someone goes to me, yeah, you're not from here, are you? And I'm like, yeah, I'm from DC. I know. I try to fit into the LA culture, but it just doesn't work. But I think they do understand that type of like creating a creative environment and producing new results because of that. So even if it's just a mindset in your office, I feel like that's super important.
Oh, absolutely.
How can the Hill bring some of that into their daily work?
I think not being afraid to sort of push the envelope, right? I think sometimes, like I said earlier, you're a little bit more measured, you're a little bit more reserved. You want to make sure we're all type A. It's a city of type A's in DC. And so I think you want to like have every single angle buttoned up. And of course you have to do that if you move forward on a project or an idea, but go on ahead and throw it out there. Maybe you'll have a collaborative effort and someone you can build off each other, instead of maybe holding that until you really feel secure.
For sure.
But it can morph into something else unexpected.
Yeah.
And that can be a beautiful thing.
Yeah, I think in my time on the Hill too, like on the digital side of things, a lot of times I would get told no because we wanted to make sure we were fitting inside this box that was created of like, this is what a member of Congress's messaging should look like. And I feel like it's important to find those opportunities to think outside the box and to like challenge visually, to at least from my perspective, how a congressional office should appear. And if all these businesses in the private sector are doing that and seeing really good feedback from their customers or just the general public, why shouldn't a member of Congress be trying to be on the cutting edge of creativity and a digital experience as well? Right.
And I think you have to meet folks where your constituents are, right? If they're on platforms listening to podcasts like this, or they're engaging on different social media sites that maybe the member would feel a little hesitant to sort of jump in on. If your constituents are on a Facebook Live, go for it, whatever it may be, right? So I think it's a little bit of, I know it may not be the traditional sense of the term, but if your constituents are going someplace for news, or how they're interacting with other in the social networks and those in their community, meet them where they are.
For sure. Yeah. So when it comes to staffers kind of growing and learning how to approach things from new ways, what advice do you have for them to kind of step out of that box of where they're at on the Hill?
Ooh, great question. I would say lean into all of the different experiences that DC has to offer, right? There's so many cultural museum, all this enrichment that's happening here. There's a vibrant music scene here as well, whatever it may be. Get out there, hear different ideas, see where, to your point, where the creatives are, or what maybe some others on the corporate side of things are doing that are interacting, that you can maybe use those tools and use them, in your day-to-day life.
For sure.
Yeah.
So, okay, well, we'll just go into this real quick. So we wanted to ask you what your favorite concerts were recently in DC. Let's just get that over with since we're on the topic.
Ooh, that is one of the hardest questions to answer for me. I would say I've seen some incredible artists. I would say I have about 3 or 4 top shows that I've seen, and they're all a little bit different. Chris Stapleton always puts on an incredible show. He's a phenomenal musician, so he's up there. I've seen the Rolling Stones a handful of times. The greatest rock and roll band in the world, so definitely there. And I also, this is going to age me, but that sort of pop punk emo band scene. So Circus Survive also puts on an incredible show, and I've seen them a handful of times. Love them. They're no longer touring, but great memories.
There you go.
Yeah.
So for those staffers who might want to work at Spotify one day, are there any fun perks that you get out of being at Spotify?
So many fun perks. I think one that's really incredible, speaking about like concerts, is they do listening lounges at our main offices. Cool. Where they'll bring sort of emerging artists in there and put that spotlight just for Spotify employees to enjoy.
Gotcha.
So you can go, and they have every sort of genre they'll come through. So that's super fun. We do a lot of fun parties and sort of bonding that way. Like I said, the first year, we do intro days, so everyone gets to go to Stockholm.
Nice.
And that's incredible. So there's all these sort of perks there. But yeah, I think they do a really good job of sort of the health and wellness too. They give everybody, or they have in the past couple years, the whole company a week off.
Nice.
So the idea is that, yes, you can use your vacation time, but the company's still moving. You come back to your inbox full. Everyone has 1,000 questions for you. Sure. Do you really feel relaxed? And so for them, they give that week off so that everybody can take a break.
That's cool.
And so like they really prioritize that. So there's these really health and wellness sort of benefits, or like having access to like talk space or things like that, I think are really awesome.
Nice. That's great. All right, well, let's go a little bit more into your journey, both on the Hill and then coming over to Spotify. But to start off, would you mind like explaining how you got onto the Hill? What was that process? I feel like everyone has such a unique story of how it happens.
Yeah. So I ended up on the Hill because I was taking an internship approach that was really, I was trying to get all three branches of government. So I'd interned with a president judge in Union and Snyder County in Pennsylvania. I had interned in the governor's office. And then when I was in grad school, I interned with 2 different congressmen there, as well as with a nonprofit, sort of how do all of these sort of public sectors interact with one another, and how we're meeting and filling each other's voids and the checks and balances amongst the whole system.
For sure.
So I took that and I took a step away, and I said, what did I enjoy most of that? And it was the legislative work. So then I came back for that second congressional internship until I finished at grad school. And then when I graduated, they said, do you want to come down to DC and be a staff assistant? I said, absolutely, see you there in 2 weeks. So picked up and moved from Pennsylvania down within 2 weeks, and the rest is history. That's sort of how I made the move.
I feel like it's very nice when you don't have to go through the stage of, I came to DC, right. I was like on my last week of money and finally got the job that like got me through, which is a fun story in its own, but it's always nice when you get the call when you haven't had to move out here yet and you just know you're coming out.
You have a secure job.
Yeah.
But I also think it's really indicative. I think that there's this notion that if you want to get on the Hill, you have to come down to DC and do a DC internship.
For sure.
And that's not always the case. Sometimes, like me, maybe it doesn't work out timing-wise, or you can't afford it. There's a variety of other factors. And so the district option, which I had 2 congressional district experiences, are a good pathway, right? Sure. I think it really does help if you do make that jump from the district office down to DC to understand your constituencies, to understand the casework side of things, which I think is if you just came through that direct path line. In the DC space, it may be harder to understand what, like the district is sort of this question mark to you. I heard from a lot of interns who just did the DC internship where they'd be like, what do they even do? Like, I don't understand what casework is. So seeing how like they feed into each other, I think is useful, but there's different pathways.
I think it creates a better appreciation of the district workers too, right? Because you do get a sense of like, oh, well, I'm a DC staffer, you know? And so we all fall into that trap at some point, but when you've gone and experienced and worked there and worked your way up from there, I think it does create a little bit of more appreciation for what's going on back home.
Absolutely. And it is also helpful too, if you're switching to a different state that you don't have any ties to, which I did. I went from Pennsylvania to a Michigan office. I was like, who are the people I need to be speaking with here? Who's so-and-so? Who's like, is this person someone I need to be speaking with? What's this organization, or what's really happening here? The district staff, I knew that they were the people I could call. And I got that feedback from DC staff. They're like, you're really ramping up and learning Michigan really well. I'm like, thanks to the wonderful district staff, because I was like, I'm wasting no time. They know everybody that I need to know. So.
That's great. Yeah, I feel like that's a huge help. I always wanted to work for a Pennsylvania member, and luckily I got to work for my home Pittsburgh member, which was great. But up until that point on the Hill, I feel like you're always playing catch up, because you don't really, you might be familiar, like I worked for Savannah, Georgia's office, and so
It's like, okay, I've been to Savannah, I understand it a little bit, but you don't understand the inner workings of how that area works or what they need. So
Right.
it's always nice to work for a home member, but when you don't get that chance, that's a good point. Get the district staff people to help you out for sure.
Yeah, an untapped resource, I feel, a lot of times, if you're not naturally inclined to make that phone call. And I think if you move to the legislative side of things, so many of my bill ideas came from district staff.
Yeah.
I would do check-ins like, what are you hearing? What are the problems that you're facing? Do you have a recurrent problem that like you constantly have to have a workaround for? Maybe I can solve it legislatively, so like you don't have to go through this over and over and over again. And you're directly helping those constituents who struggled with it, right? So I got a lot of ideas actually through the district staff of like, what are you seeing in casework?
Yeah, for sure. And I think from a DC policy staffer's perspective, you get a lot of people coming in the door, like yourself, who are more like put together like government affairs perspective of like, this is our message, this is what we need to do. Whereas like boots on the ground back home, you get kind of the more raw message of like, hey, this is what's actually going on. Or if you can pick up on those themes, it's a great opportunity.
Absolutely.
Cool. Well, on that note, what are some recommendations for people who want to take a quick trip up to Eastern Pennsylvania? It's so close. You're from Harrisburg.
Yeah.
Where can people go? Because it's so accessible from DC by train. So what are some recommendations?
Absolutely. I will truncate this out. So if you're going to the Philly area, that is a quick Acela train. Amtrak's wonderful for that. Also cheap buses. I would say there, I mean, just go to the city if you've never been before. Go to Reading Terminal Market. See, Liberty Bell, do the traditional things, but there's some really great food there. Please try a cheesesteak, all of that good stuff that you hear, definitely worth it. I think if you're willing to go to Central Pennsylvania, Harrisburg, a little gem, definitely try Hershey Park.
Yeah, that's a classic.
Yeah, it's so much fun. Hershey's phenomenal. There's Trogues Brewery that's right next door. You can go into the parks. You can just go to Chocolate World and see how chocolate's made. That's so much fun.
I feel like another part of Harrisburg is just the Pennsylvania state capitol too.
Right.
That I've only seen pictures of it, and I'm so disappointed that I never got to go working in PA politics. But I'll see pictures and I'm like, can someone get me a tour to go over there? It just looks so freaking beautiful. Like the U.S. Capitol on steroids.
Oh, yeah. I don't know. You have to fact check me on this because someone told me when I was in the governor's office at some point that Pennsylvania is ranked the second most beautiful state capital, next like Wisconsin. I don't know who's doing this ranking or where that came from, but that has always stuck with me. But it's absolutely stunning.
Yeah. Like
so underrated.
The House and Senate floor, and then just like the overall like rotunda, wild. Can't wait to make my journey there. So if there are any Pennsylvania staffers listening who would love to accompany Connect on a trip to the Pennsylvania State Capitol, please let us know. Okay, so switching up topics here, we heard that you went to grad school right out of college.
Yes.
Okay, cool. So we obviously do a lot of work at Connect with grad fairs. We have one coming up soon. But when it comes to staffers saying, hey, like I want to grow in my career, I'm already here in DC, but I want to take that next step, would you recommend a grad program?
I think you need to ask yourself, what job do you want, right? What's that going to give you? Obviously, no one ever. Education is so worthwhile. It's never going to hurt, right? I think there are certain positions where you might not need it, but if it's going to help you in your next step, in your next opportunity, or grow within the position you already are, I say go for it. It is an investment of time, and money, energy, all of that. So you want to make sure it's worth that step. I think the timing of it is also important too, to think about the right time to go to grad school. As you said, I went straight through, and looking back at that, so I did a master's in public administration, which is basically like an MBA, but with like a heart that's focusing on nonprofit and government, the public sector sort of focus. And it was a little difficult because while it was so worthwhile, I had gone straight through, so I didn't really have that much professional experience to sort of lean on and inform my learning. So I think had I maybe done that at a later time, it would have been more impactful. So I think the timing of that, you have to think about where are you in your career. If you're going to do a master's program or something like that, that's really specializing in a policy area or whatever it may be. Do you have enough background information to really take that and ask the right questions and move forward? So I think the timing is important, and if it's going to actually help your career, go for it. Like I said, education is never a negative thing. It's
Yeah.
always great to, continue learning and growing, and asking yourself and improving. And, but I think the timing and where you see yourself in your career, if it makes sense for you,
For sure.
but you don't need it.
Yeah, I think that's a really good way to put it. Like someone like me would not do well in grad school. Like I
you'd
would
be
just
great.
be flushing that money down the drain. So I'm like, I would rather go start a business and get my MBA that way, and God forbid flush that money down the drain. But for me to sit in a classroom and at this age and just go through that process again, I'm not sure I could do it. But like that's my experience, and we
Right.
have a lot of people in this town who thrive in those type of environments, and happy for you. I wish I could be that person.
Well, I also say too, it's like there's so many options where you can get your grad school paid for.
Yeah.
So I think that's important. I think people really see the price tag of higher education and they're like, ooh, like I'm a little nervous about that. But there are so many companies who will pay for your grad school, or positions that will pay for your grad school, or you could do like some teaching assistant work or things like that that really help supplement that. That's what I did at Villanova. So I think that there are some options for you. So I feel like cost is always a huge barrier in the grad school. But like I said, there's jobs, there's other programs. I know the Hill does some things on the military side that like that's free, et cetera, if you're a staffer. So taking advantage of those options for you and the timing of that, I think is important.
For sure, yeah. So for the staffers listening, or for anybody, we always have grad fairs coming up, so check us out. But on another note, you worked on the Energy and Commerce Committee, or worked with the Energy and Commerce Committee, and such a prolific committee. So much gets done there, and I feel like they have a really good grip on how to process legislation, which I think has to be a part of like bipartisanship working across the aisle. So in your time there, like how did you experience bipartisanship in action, and what did you learn from that process?
Absolutely. I agree. It's so important. And Energy and Commerce is such a powerful committee. And I just love the fact that you can sort of find a nexus for anything to sort of pass through that committee. Anything could be commerce,
Yeah,
right? But I think I'm very blessed and lucky to have worked for two members who are known to be such bipartisan individuals. One being former chairman of House Energy and Commerce Committee, Fred Upton. And that was just such a large part of how he moved, was being bipartisan and thoughtful and leading that way. And so having those two great examples from Congressman Costello, also who was on Energy and Commerce, who was very bipartisan, really shine a light on how important that is. And I think the key thing here is relationships and taking the time to build those relationships. I feel recently things have gotten so, and you're nodding
Just a
ahead,
bit.
things have gotten so contentious on sometimes things. And it really comes down to building that layer of trust that I can go across the aisle and say, hey, I've been thinking about this. We'd be willing to partner, and know that you can have that dialogue. And also sometimes, you do have to take a principled stand on something. But if you have that relationship and that you've given on other issues, then maybe that the other side will say, hey, I understand where you're at here. I'm willing to give a little bit more because you've been so helpful in these other areas when I needed it, when I had to take a stand principally. So I think having those relationships and having that trust in one another, that there's that give and take, is so important, in having those dialogues. I think if you're not having those dialogues frequently, it's so much more difficult to accomplish anything, right? You have to come from the relationship building angle there. And it's also that mindset that you value it, right? I think sometimes we can get so siloed that we don't see outside of that, and the greater picture here of like, there's a greater good. We all want the same thing, right? Whatever, think of a policy issue. It's like, in the end, we all want people to, be safe, and we all want individuals to have food on their plate and have jobs and all these wonderful things. We may have different approaches of how to get there, but our end goal is the same. So focusing on moving forward and making America a better place to be, or your district's a better place to be, finding that common ground, right?
Yeah. Compromise, as you mentioned, is such an important aspect of that, which I feel like compromise has become such a dirty word in this town.
Sadly.
We want to fight against that and realize no one wins 100% of the time. And if you are winning 100% of the time, you're probably bulldozing someone else in that process. And if you choose to give a little and compromise, it's going to help you outside of politics too. It's going to help you in relationships, friendships, a marriage, whatever that may be. You can't win all the time. And so what would you say to those staffers who go, you guys are kind of just like giving away the priorities, or you're compromising too much and you're messing with our party's values or whatever that may be. Because I think there are a lot of people out there that say like, we want to win and we don't want to compromise on anything. So how do you fight that narrative?
It's a tough narrative to fight, right? And like I said, it is the mindset that you have to go in when you're approaching issues. Like I said, there are going to be instances where it's a principled belief and you do have to stand your ground, but there are instances where you necessarily don't. Is this the hill you want to die on, right? Yeah. Is this a small thing about maybe if you're doing a bill or legislative text, are we going to fight over nickel and dime over $1 million on something if it's really going to help? What is it, right? Yeah. I think taking a hard look at how important the overarching mission of that is. And yes, sometimes you do have to take a principled and you do have to dig your heels in, but other times it's like, if I'm still able to accomplish, what do I care about in this scenario? If I have these 3 main priority points, if I'm still accomplishing these 3 things, does it really matter how much that I'm getting there as long as I'm accomplishing these 3 things? And if you're looking at a bill, it's like I had one and 2 aspects of this bill are the most important to me. As long as we can keep those, and that's what we're going to fight in, and you can agree on the other side that we're keeping those aspects or those portions of the bill or whatever it may be, and I may need to give a little here. Yeah. Fine, but like you know what you want to accomplish, what your end goal is, and also know that tides always turn, right? Like if you're willing to give a little bit when it's politics, right? The shoe's going to be on the other foot eventually at some point. Yeah. Waves turn, tides turn, and so you treat how you want to be treated. If you're if you're in the minority or in the majority, and that switches, what you would like to see out of that, right? Yeah. So it's also keeping that in mind of like, I may not always have the power end of this negotiation, and how would I want the person on the other side to treat me as we're working on a bill together, or I'm trying to get something in appropriations or whatever it may be. So I think having that mindset of like, this is not always a short-term battle, but a long-term battle of what I'm going to need to do to accomplish for my district, right? Yeah. And for the nation as a whole. It's
super easy when you're on the Hill to get caught up in the then, or like in the now, to like, this is all that matters, and focus so much on that, and not think about the long term of the repercussions, or how you're probably going to be placed in this exact same position in the next Congress. And I think that's why you can see so many clips on social media of people being like, are catching politicians and saying, oh, like you flip-flop on this all the time. It's because if you focus only on that moment and just hammer on that point no matter what, and you come back later and the roles are reversed, you kind of look silly sometimes. So you have to be careful of that and keep the long-term approach.
Absolutely. And I also think to the earlier point of like the mindset and the relationship building, I think there is a hesitancy to sort of hang out with folks in your circle and and what have you. But I think it really does help your career long-term to break out from that. I think, especially if you're in a state delegation or something like that, knowing your partners and having those relationships really help. I went to Pennsylvania State Society, the Michigan State, all those places, and doing staff deals with people across the hour, building those relationships about those who have those shared interests, right? They're all working towards the health and growth of your state. They're all working towards, you have this shared interest, something that's already inherent, right? Yeah. I have a shared interest in this, whatever policy may be wrong on the staff deal, right? So you can build off of that. I think that's so important. And some of the work that you guys do, it's like if you're coming to these events, there's a built-in shared interest here, and start that relationship off from that space.
Yeah, I don't call it this. I refer to someone who called it this, but the 101 rule, where you find the one thing you have in common and you focus 100% of your attention on that. And then that allows you to build a relationship and to then get to a point where you have this mutual respect where you can have the harder conversations as well and truly hear where someone's coming from. But a lot of times we don't get to that point, and that's why we want to help, like, hey, you might have this, and that in common, and we want to be a conduit of that process to help people figure out, oh, well, they're Republican, I'm Democrat, like, how could we have anything in common? It's just not true.
Right, absolutely.
All right, so wrapping this up, I think a lot of people have this question who are in policy staff, or the younger people as well, from intern to staff assistants, whatever it may be. They want to know, all right, I came to DC, I want to be a lobbyist one day. And while a lot of that will change, sometimes there's still a lot of people that want to pursue that career path. So what are your words to them? how do you accomplish that goal of making the jump from Hill staffer to on the government affairs side of things? Should they wait to a certain period in their career before making the jump? Could they go over early? What does it look like?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And I get that a lot in most of my like informational coffees I do with staffers. I would say there are positions for you after like a year or two, but the level may not be what you have anticipated in your mind with what that's going to look like. But I also think before you make the jump, ask yourself, did I accomplish everything here that I wanted to accomplish?
Yeah.
I think people, sometimes we have a lot of the revolving door because you left a little bit too soon, right?
Yeah.
That they maybe left, or think about the timing. If you've been working on a bill or a project for a long period of time, and there's still a lane that this might get done, and you leave right before then, and then you see it across the finish line, and that really hurts, it really bothers you, or you could have said, I could have moved it. Like, I could have moved the needle on that. So making sure that you feel that you've accomplished what you set out to do on the Hill before you make the jump. And you can always come back for sure. But I think that helps in sort of the transition because it is a very different approach. I think people take for granted that when you are on the Hill, the amount of access to information that you have is
for sure.
phenomenal. It's incredible. You take for granted that I can pick up the phone and I can call DOD or I can call whatever and I can get all my questions answered like that, right? And when you leave, it's a lot more of an exercise, right?
Yeah,
it's hard to get
absolutely.
the information, or even just something so simple as like, when do we think we're moving something, right? I'm making multiple phone calls. So I think two components of that is like, have that network that you have, that you've built something out before you really leave, before you make the jump to lobbying or government affairs or some policy aspect there, because you have to be able to lean on those folks. You're no longer really going to have that quick access to information. Sometimes you may need to call a friend and say like, hey, I've been trying to get answers to X, Y, and Z. Maybe can you just call over there and they'll give it to you.
For sure.
Very quickly, and we can work together, move forward on this, project that we're working on, right? Whatever it may be. So I think having that network, knowing when's the right time, do you feel like you've accomplished what you set out to do? Also just knowing that your sort of nexus of how you're approaching issues will change. And I think that was a hard transition for me because when you're looking at a piece of legislation or a bill, it's always from the mindset of like, is this good for the district? Is this good for the nation as a whole? You're moving forward to these huge sweeping, sometimes it can be a little overwhelming. It's like, is this going to help solve X, Y, and Z problem for the entire nation, right? But it feels very meaningful. And so having to take a step back and say, that's not the first question I'm asking anymore. It's still a question I'm asking when I'm reviewing a bill or policy and advocating for it or what may be. But now the first question that I'm asking for is this good for my company?
For sure.
So you do have to have that mind. So it's like, what is your mission? So I think it's important when you do leave, make sure you're going to someplace that you're passionate about, right? That doesn't bother you, that you're having to ask these questions, right? Like I believe in Spotify and Spotify's mission of, helping creators live off their art and all of that. And so for me, when I'm looking at that, I'm like, I know I'm asking this question to help facilitate that mission, right? And so I feel invested. And it doesn't necessarily bother me that I'm like, my first response is like, is this good for Spotify, right?
For sure.
So I think making sure you leave to a place that you're invested in or you're handling issues, if you're going to like a multi-client firm, whatever it may be, that's something you care about. So that when you're having to review legislation and go and advocate for something that you may not necessarily naturally would have believed in, you can see that nexus there. You can see the angle of how that's meaningful for you. Because so much of the work on the Hill and in government in general is so mission driven, and that's what makes the work so rewarding. So making sure that you're really considering where you're going to and that jump makes sense for you, that you're not gonna lose that.
Yeah, I think fulfillment is such an important part of life, and it doesn't have to come from your job, but like your job can make it much easier or harder depending on your choices. And there are plenty of people out there that feel like they don't need to find their fulfillment at work, but when you are willing to put in the extra time maybe to pass up an opportunity because you want to accomplish a certain goal with where you go work after that, I think you're a prime example of finding something you were truly passionate about, waiting for the right opportunity, and now you're in a position where you're very excited about the work you do, and in turn it makes your work way easier.
Absolutely. And really loving where you're going is so important. Like I always said, and I think it was a running joke when I was interviewing at Spotify, I would say I was a beta tester user when we launched in the US. Like I scrounged for that email code to try it out first,
That's
right?
crazy.
Because the time I was a musician, and it was so difficult of doing this process of like doing the thing that like now makes me cringe, but like I was using LimeWire, I was taking someone's CD and ripping the music, and I was doing these things because it was so hard to get access, right? And so when I found out about Spotify, I was like, incredible, right? Like this really changes. I heard so many new artists and genres around the globe that I would have never had access to in my normal network.
Yeah.
Because if you think about it, right, I think it's, and now I'm sort of on a tangent, so I apologize, but it's like you look at how we were ingesting music before, and it was very much so, what did your CD store, your record store have? It's what was playing on the radio, what could you get that way? And so sometimes you really weren't expanding as much as you would probably have liked, and the discoverability of new and especially emerging artists. Like I love that as a musician. I was like, this is incredible. I've heard from so many different artists and bands I never would have come across in my day-to-day life, right? Like who's coming to Central Pennsylvania to play a concert, right? Like it's limited, right? Not that it's terrible, but it's not quite the same as like, I'm not hearing like Italian rap, right? It's just not happening. So I think it's incredible. So like I was so deeply passionate about that, and I was excited to work for that company. So yeah, maybe they're doing meaningful work, but doesn't excite that in you, right? Maybe not everyone's as excited how I just am about like having that access to your fingertips and how we change. That's completely fine, but there's something out there for you. So it's like, make sure you're passionate about it. And like I said, that you feel like you've accomplished all that you want to do, and that you have a strong network too, because as terrible as it is, that's what lobbying is. It's your network. So if you feel like you still have some work to do, it's only going to make your job harder on the other side. So
I feel like that's a great place to wrap. That was such a cool conclusion, and thank you for sharing like your true passion about music. It really comes out, and we want to help people find that opportunity to find something they're truly passionate about and pursue that, even if it's not like the path that you decided when you were 22 years old when you came out here that you were going to take, but figure out what you're passionate about and enjoy it over time. And you're a perfect example of the results.
Right. And the fun thing about DC too, and this is a quick note, is that especially if you're on the Hill, there's so many different policy areas that you may all of a sudden get handed something that you never would have thought you would have an interest in. Explore those. If something sort of tickles your fancy and you're like, oh, maybe I am sort of, what is fisheries management or whatever it may be for you? You never would have thought you would have ended up there, and you explore it, and now you have a new passion. So you have so many opportunities to really dig in a way here that you wouldn't have elsewhere. So I think it's such an incredible opportunity, and you're in a space where all these opportunities are just at your feet, ready for you to take them. So
absolutely. Well, Stephanie, thank you for joining us today. Glad to have you.
Great to be here. Thank you so much.
Hey, it's David again. Thank you guys for listening today. We're really excited about this Capital Spotlight podcast and getting it off the ground. So make sure to tune in again. And the easiest way to do that is subscribe to our channels. Check us out on social media at Connect App, CNCT, APP, basically everywhere. So find us there, subscribe to our newsletter, and check out our website, capitalconnect.com. Thanks, guys.